The bright lights of the Family Feud studio created their usual warm glow on that Tuesday afternoon in August 2024, but the atmosphere was anything but warm. Steve Harvey stood at his podium watching something unfold that he had never witnessed in over a decade of hosting the show. Two people who had stood before a minister and promised to love and honor each other were now engaged in a bitter argument on national television, their voices rising with each exchange, their words cutting deeper than any game show question ever could. If you appreciate stories about real families working through real problems and the wisdom it takes to help them heal, make sure you subscribe to this channel right now and hit that notification bell so you never miss these powerful moments. The Carter family from Detroit, Michigan had arrived at the studio that morning full of excitement and competitive energy. Leading the family was Robert Carter, a 53-year-old auto plant supervisor with broad shoulders and a commanding presence that came from years of managing production lines. Standing beside him was his wife of 28 years, Linda Carter, a 51-year-old woman with tired eyes and a smile that did not quite reach those eyes. Their three adult children stood behind them, along with Robert's younger brother, making up the full team of 5 family members required for the competition. From the moment the taping began, Steve had noticed tension between Robert and Linda. It was subtle at first, the kind of thing that someone less observant might have missed. The way Linda would tense up when Robert spoke. The way Robert would correct her under his breath when she was about to answer. The way their children exchanged worried glances whenever their parents interacted. These were the signs of a marriage under strain, cracks in the foundation that had been developing over years and were now visible to anyone paying attention. The game had progressed through 2 rounds without major incident, though the undercurrent of tension remained present like electricity in the air before a thunderstorm. The Carters were competing against the Morrison family from Phoenix, Arizona, and the competition was close enough to keep things interesting. Robert had been dominating the gameplay for his family, answering most of the questions himself and racking up points with the kind of confidence that suggested he was used to being in charge and making decisions. Then came the 3rd round, and everything changed. The question Steve read seemed innocent enough, the kind of everyday topic that usually generated lighthearted responses and audience laughter. He asked the families to name something that couples argue about most often. It was a classic Family Feud question, one that had probably been asked in various forms dozens of times over the years. Money, housework, in-laws, and parenting styles were typically the top answers, familiar territory that contestants could navigate easily. Linda was standing at the podium for this question, her turn to represent the family and hopefully score valuable points. She thought for a moment, her expression showing the mental process of considering which answer might be on the board. When she spoke, her voice was clear and carried a weight of personal experience. Linda said that couples argue most about one person making all the decisions without asking the other person what they think. It was a specific answer, more specific than the question really called for, and it clearly came from her own life rather than from guessing what survey respondents might have said. Steve nodded at the answer and prepared to check the board, but before he could reveal whether it was there, Robert's voice cut across the stage with sharp disapproval. His tone was dismissive and carried an edge of anger that seemed disproportionate to the situation. Robert said loudly that Linda had just given a stupid answer and wasted their turn because she never thought about what would actually be on the board. He said she always made everything personal and could not just play the game like a normal person. The studio audience reacted with an uncomfortable murmur. This was not playful family teasing. This was genuine hostility, and it was being directed at a wife by her husband in front of 200 strangers and multiple cameras. Linda's face flushed red with a combination of embarrassment and anger. Her hands gripped the podium tightly, knuckles turning white from the pressure. Steve Harvey's expression shifted from his usual game show host smile to something more serious and concerned. Before Steve could intervene or move the game forward, Linda turned to face her husband directly. Her voice when she spoke was shaking but determined, the voice of someone who had been holding things inside for far too long and had finally reached a breaking point. Linda said that maybe if Robert ever bothered to ask her opinion about anything instead of just making every decision himself and expecting everyone to go along with it, she would not have to make things personal. She said she was tired of being treated like her thoughts and feelings did not matter. Robert's face darkened with anger. He took a step forward, and for a moment the security staff tensed, ready to intervene if necessary. Robert's voice rose as he fired back that Linda was being ridiculous and embarrassing their family on television. He said that someone had to make decisions in their household because she was too indecisive and emotional to handle important matters. He said he worked hard to provide for their family and deserved respect, not constant criticism and complaints. Linda's anger flared hotter in response to his words. She said that providing money was not the same as being a partner in a marriage. She said that for 28 years she had gone along with his decisions about where they lived, how they spent money, how they raised their children, and what they did with their free time. She said she had supported his career moves even when it meant leaving behind her own job and her own friends. She said she had been a good wife and a good mother, but somewhere along the way she had stopped being a person with her own voice and her own choices. The argument was escalating rapidly, voices getting louder, words getting harsher. Their adult children looked mortified, clearly recognizing that family issues they had witnessed privately for years were now being exposed to the world. The Morrison family stood frozen, unsure whether they should leave the stage or stay. The studio audience watched in stunned silence, no longer sure if they were at a game show taping or a marriage counseling session. That was when Steve Harvey made a decision that would define the episode and create one of the most talked-about moments in Family Feud history. He put down his cards with deliberate force, the sound echoing through the silent studio. He stepped away from his podium and walked to the center of the stage, positioning himself between Robert and Linda. His voice when he spoke carried absolute authority, the kind of command that comes from years of life experience and a fundamental understanding of right and wrong. Steve said he was stopping the game right now because what was happening on his stage was not acceptable and was not going to continue. He said that he had watched couples have disagreements on the show before, but what he was witnessing between Robert and Linda was not a disagreement. It was a pattern of disrespect and dysfunction that had clearly been going on for a long time. His words cut through the tension like a knife, bringing a sudden halt to the escalating argument. Robert immediately tried to downplay the situation, his tone shifting to something more defensive. He said they were just having a small argument, and Steve was making too big a deal out of it. He suggested they should just continue with the game and move past this awkward moment. But Steve was not having any of it. He shook his head firmly and said that dismissing the problem and moving on was exactly what had allowed things to get to this point in the first place. Steve turned to Linda and asked her directly how long things had been like this in her marriage. His voice was gentle but insistent, creating a safe space for honesty. Linda's eyes filled with tears as she looked at Steve, then at her husband, then back at Steve. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper at first but grew stronger as she continued. She said that it had been years, maybe even most of their marriage. She said that Robert was not a bad man and he had never been physically abusive, but he had slowly taken over every aspect of their lives until she felt like she had no say in anything. Linda explained that when they first got married, Robert had strong opinions about things, and she had gone along with them because she loved him and wanted to be supportive. But over time, going along with his opinions became the expected pattern. Anytime she expressed a different view or wanted to make a choice about something, Robert would override her. He would explain why his way was better, why her ideas were impractical, why she was not seeing the situation clearly. Eventually, she had stopped offering opinions at all because it was easier than constantly being told she was wrong. She talked about the big decisions he had made without really consulting her, taking a job transfer that required them to move away from her family, buying a new truck they could not really afford because he wanted it, deciding how they would spend their tax refund without asking what she might want or need, making plans for their retirement without considering her dreams or preferences. Each decision individually might not seem like a huge deal, but collectively they had created a marriage where one person had all the power and the other person had learned to be silent. The studio audience listened in complete silence as Linda described what it felt like to lose yourself slowly over years of marriage. She said that she had raised their children and managed their household and supported Robert's career, but somewhere along the way she had stopped being Linda and had become just Robert's wife, just the kid's mother, just the person who went along with whatever everyone else wanted. She said that when their youngest child left for college last year, she had looked at her life and realized she did not even know who she was anymore outside of those roles. Steve turned to Robert with an expression that combined disappointment and determination. He said that he needed Robert to really hear what his wife was saying and understand the seriousness of the situation. Steve said that marriage was supposed to be a partnership, with both people having equal voice in decisions that affected their lives. He said that consistently overriding your partner's opinions and preferences was not leadership, it was control, and it damaged the foundation of love and respect that marriage was supposed to be built on. Robert's defensive posture was starting to crack. His face showed a mixture of emotions as he processed what his wife had said and what Steve was telling him. He tried to justify his behavior by explaining that he had only wanted to take care of his family and make sure they had a good life. He said that his father had been the same way, making the decisions for the household while his mother took care of the home and children. He said he had thought he was being a good husband and provider by taking responsibility for major decisions. Steve nodded, acknowledging that Robert had probably grown up with a certain model of marriage based on his parents' relationship. But Steve said that just because something was the way your parents did it did not mean it was the right way or the healthy way. He said that many men of previous generations operated under the assumption that being the breadwinner gave them the right to make all the decisions, but that model had caused pain and resentment in countless marriages. He said that wives were not children to be managed or employees to be directed. They were equal partners who deserved to be heard and respected. Steve asked Robert to imagine how it would feel to have every opinion dismissed, every preference overridden, every choice taken away. He asked him to think about going through years of having someone else decide what was best for him without really listening to what he wanted or needed. Robert's face showed that he was beginning to understand, beginning to see his behavior from his wife's perspective for perhaps the first time. The Carter children had been standing quietly during this exchange, but now their oldest daughter spoke up. Her voice was emotional as she said that she had grown up watching her father treat her mother this way and had promised herself she would never accept that kind of relationship. She said that she loved both her parents, but she had seen her mother become smaller and quieter over the years, and it had broken her heart. She said that she was glad this was finally being addressed, even if the venue was unconventional. Their son added that he had learned from his father's example what a husband was supposed to be, and it had taken years and a failed engagement to realize that treating a partner the way his father treated his mother was not actually love or leadership. He said he had to unlearn those patterns and learn what a real partnership looked like. His voice carried both love for his father and pain over the impact of growing up in a household where decision-making was so one-sided. Robert stood there listening to his children describe how his behavior had affected not just his wife, but the entire family. You could see the realization dawning on his face that he had damaged more than just his marriage. He had modeled unhealthy relationship dynamics for his children, potentially affecting their future relationships and marriages. When he spoke again, his voice was different, softer, and filled with something that sounded like genuine remorse. Robert said he had never thought about it the way Steve and his family were describing it. He said he had genuinely believed he was being a good husband by taking care of things and making sure his family was provided for. He said his intentions had been good, even if his methods were wrong. But Steve interrupted him gently and said that intentions did not erase impact. He said that many people caused harm while intending to do good, and the harm was still real even if it was unintentional. Steve shared some of his own story, talking about his previous marriages and the mistakes he had made before learning what it meant to truly be a partner to someone. He said he had also grown up in a generation where men were taught that their role was to lead and provide, while women's role was to support and submit. But he said he had learned through painful experience that this model did not create happy marriages or healthy families. He said his current marriage was successful because he and his wife made decisions together, valued each other's input, and respected each other as equal partners. The studio audience began to applaud Steve's words, showing their support for the message he was delivering. Steve turned back to Robert and Linda and said that they had a choice to make. They could continue with the pattern that had defined their marriage for 28 years, which would almost certainly lead to increasing resentment and eventual breakdown of the relationship. Or they could use this moment as a turning point, as an opportunity to rebuild their marriage on a foundation of mutual respect and genuine partnership. Steve said that the work of changing would not be easy. It would require Robert to examine his behavior and his assumptions, to learn to truly listen to his wife and value her input even when it differed from his own opinions. It would require Linda to find her voice again and learn to advocate for herself after years of being silent. It would require both of them to communicate honestly and work through decades of accumulated hurt and resentment. He strongly recommended they seek professional marriage counseling to help them navigate this process. Robert turned to his wife, and for the first time since the argument began, he really looked at her. not as an opponent in a fight or as someone who had embarrassed him, but as the woman he had married 28 years ago and built a life with. When he spoke, tears were visible in his eyes. He said he was sorry for dismissing her and for making her feel like she did not matter. He said he did not want to lose her, and he was willing to do the work to change their marriage into what it should have been all along. Linda looked at her husband with an expression that held both hope and caution. She had heard apologies before, had seen moments of awareness that did not translate into lasting change. But there was something different about this moment, something about the public nature of it and the intervention of someone Robert clearly respected that made it feel more significant. She said she loved him and wanted their marriage to work, but she needed to see real change, not just promises. Steve suggested they take a break from taping. He said that the game was not important right now, and what mattered was this family beginning the process of healing. He offered to connect them with resources for marriage counseling and suggested they take time to talk privately without cameras and audience. The Morrison family, their competitors, agreed that continuing the game felt inappropriate given what had just happened. During the break, Steve spent time talking with the Carter family away from the cameras. The production staff gave them privacy and space to process what had occurred. When they returned to the stage 45 minutes later, there was a visible change in the dynamic between Robert and Linda. They were not magically fixed, but they were standing closer together, and their body language suggested they were facing the situation as a team rather than as opponents. Robert addressed the studio audience and the cameras, knowing that millions of people would eventually see this. He said he was embarrassed that his marriage problems had been exposed on national television, but he was also grateful. He said that the argument on stage had forced him to confront things he had been avoiding or denying for years. He said he was committing to marriage counseling and to learning how to be the partner his wife deserved. Linda added that she was also committed to working on the marriage and on finding her voice again. She said that she had played a part in the dynamic by going along with things and not speaking up, and she needed to learn to advocate for herself and communicate her needs clearly. She thanked Steve for intervening and for creating the space for this difficult but necessary conversation. Steve made a decision that the episode would end there rather than continuing with the game. He said that some things were more important than prize money and television entertainment. He announced that both the Carter family and the Morrison family would receive the full $20,000 as a gesture of support for what they had gone through. The Morrison family had been gracious and patient during a difficult situation, and the Carter family needed resources to invest in saving their marriage. When the episode aired 3 months later, the response was unprecedented. The network had debated whether to show the episode at all, given how raw and painful the conflict had been. But they ultimately decided that the honest portrayal of a struggling marriage and the intervention that led to a commitment to change could help other families facing similar issues. They included resources at the end of the episode for viewers who might need marriage counseling or domestic support services. The clip went viral immediately, but the conversation around it was different from typical viral moments. Marriage counselors reported that couples came to their first sessions specifically because of seeing the Carter family episode. They said that watching Robert and Linda's conflict played out on screen helped partners recognize patterns in their own relationships that needed to be addressed. Support groups for women who had lost themselves in their marriages reported increased attendance and more open conversations about the pressure to be submissive and agreeable at the expense of their own identity. Men's groups also engaged with the episode, discussing the ways that traditional masculinity and ideas about male leadership in marriage could be harmful even when intentions were good. Many men shared that they recognized themselves in Robert's behavior and realized they needed to examine their own relationships and the ways they might be dominating or dismissing their partners without realizing the damage being caused. The Carter family did a follow-up interview 6 months after the episode aired. They appeared together on Steve Harvey's talk show to share their journey of marriage counseling and rebuilding their relationship. Robert spoke openly about how difficult it had been to confront his controlling behavior and to learn to truly listen to his wife. He said that counseling had helped him understand that his need for control came from his own insecurities and his fear of being vulnerable or wrong. Linda talked about the process of rediscovering herself after years of suppressing her own desires and opinions. She said that therapy had helped her understand that being a good wife did not mean having no needs or preferences of her own. She was taking art classes, something she had always wanted to do but had never pursued because Robert thought it was a waste of time and money. She had reconnected with old friends and was building a support network outside of her family. Their children joined them for part of the interview and shared how the changes in their parents' marriage had affected them positively. The oldest daughter said that watching her parents do the hard work of rebuilding their relationship had given her hope and had shown her that it was never too late to change harmful patterns. Their son said that his father's willingness to acknowledge his mistakes and make real changes had actually increased his respect for him rather than diminishing it. Robert and Linda both emphasized that the work was ongoing and not always easy. They said there were setbacks and difficult conversations and moments when old patterns tried to reassert themselves. But they were committed to the process because they had seen how much better their relationship could be when they operated as true partners. They credited Steve Harvey with intervening at a critical moment and giving them the push they needed to finally address issues they had been avoiding for decades. Steve, during that follow-up interview, talked about why he had chosen to stop the game and confront the Carters' marriage issues directly. He said that he could have ignored the conflict or smoothed it over and continued with the show, but doing so would have been a missed opportunity to address something important. He said that his platform gave him a responsibility to speak truth and to use those moments when real life broke through the entertainment veneer to help people rather than just create viral content. The legacy of that episode continued for years. Marriage counselors used it as a teaching tool in their practices. Universities included it in courses on communication and relationship dynamics. It was referenced in articles and books about healthy marriages and gender roles. Most importantly, countless couples reported that watching the Carters' painful public conflict and subsequent commitment to change had inspired them to seek help for their own struggling marriages before it was too late. If you have been moved by the Carter family's journey from public conflict to genuine healing, make sure you like this video and subscribe to our channel for more powerful real-life stories. Share this with someone who might need to hear that it is never too late to change harmful patterns and build the relationship you truly want. Comment below about what you learned from Robert and Linda's story, or share your own experience with finding balance and respect in marriage. 5 years after that Family Feud taping, the Carters celebrated their 33rd wedding anniversary. They had renewed their vows in a small ceremony with just their children and closest friends present. The vows they wrote were different from the traditional promises they had made decades earlier. They promised to honor each other as equal partners, to make important decisions together, to value each other's opinions and preferences, and to never let one person's voice drown out the others. Robert had become an advocate for healthy masculinity and partnership in marriage. He spoke at men's groups and church gatherings about his journey from controlling husband to genuine partner. He was honest about his mistakes and the harm he had caused, and his vulnerability helped other men feel safe examining their own behavior. He said that changing had been the hardest thing he had ever done, but it had saved his marriage and improved his relationships with his children. Linda had blossomed in ways that surprised even herself. She had become a successful artist, selling her paintings at local galleries and art shows. She had joined community organizations and made leadership contributions in ways she never could have when she was suppressing her own voice. She mentored younger women about the importance of maintaining their identity and voice within marriage, rather than losing themselves completely in wife and mother roles. The story of the Carters became more than just a viral Family Feud moment. It became a testament to the possibility of real change and growth even after decades of unhealthy patterns. It showed that public accountability sometimes created the catalyst needed for transformation. It demonstrated that marriages could survive conflict and come out stronger when both partners committed to doing the difficult work of building genuine partnership and mutual respect.